So I am Ceri Hunter and I am the Senior Policy Advisor for Children and Young People's Participation and Child Rights and Wellbeing Impact Assessments at the Scottish Government. I'm part of the Children's Rights Unit, which is the broader unit that covers children's rights participation and the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and Corporation Scotland Bill. Another long title for everyone, shortened to UNCRC and Corporation Scotland Bill to make it simpler. Okay, so yes, so today we're going to talk about child rights and wellbeing impact assessments, but I will give you a quick update on where we are with the bill at the moment, because there's been some changes, and we've got a rough outline of what we're going to do on the screen today. Hopefully I won't be talking the whole time, but please make sure you can stick your questions in the chat box and I will answer as best I can. If I can't answer your question, perhaps for legal reasons because of the situation with the bill, which I will explain, what we'll do is we can save the chat and we can get back to you with the questions, and so that way you've got a proper response to where we're at with it. You'll also get a break as well, so it's important that we get Zoom breaks because we live our life on video conferencing now. So what we'll do next is we will start off with where we're at with the bill. So in case you weren't aware, the UNCRC and Corporation Scotland Bill was introduced to Parliament in September last year, and it was taking a maximalist approach, which basically means we will do our best to incorporate as much of the Convention on the Rights of the Child as we possibly can within the powers of the Scottish Government and Scottish Parliament. As you may be aware, we don't have the power to incorporate everything because some of the powers are reserved to the UK Parliament. So we are doing as much as we possibly can within Scotland. So our goal for the bill is to give children in Scotland the highest level of protection possible within our powers. And that's in line with all of our current practice. We've obviously had the Children and Young People Scotland Act previous to this, which started the ball rolling of incorporating children's rights. But we've also got other things as well, like the Human Rights Act and then Getting It Right for Every Child. What the difference in this will be is that there will be a significant change when it comes to accountability, and that children and young people will be able to enforce their rights. So where children and young people feel their rights are not being met, they will have the ability to then challenge that situation, whether that be school, local authority, Scottish Government. So that's the significant change. The main purpose of the actual Act itself is for ourselves, Scottish Government, not to act incompatibly with the UNCRC, and that's the rules that we will be reporting on once we've reached commencement. And so if you're familiar with the Human Rights Act, it's a very similar process that we've gone down. It will apply to all public bodies and functions of a public nature within powers of Scottish Parliament. So local authorities, health boards, various ones that had duties under the Children and Young People Scotland Act, it will also apply to them, such as Independent Living Fund, the Law Society, Social Security Scotland, Social Work Scotland. There's a big range of organisations that this will apply to, and not just Scottish Government. It also includes a requirement for Scottish ministers to publish a children's rights scheme. Basically what that means is this is what we are going to do under the bill to say this is how we have met our duties. So it's going to be things like preparing child rights and wellbeing impact assessments, the progress that we've made over time at Scottish Government to say this is how we've met children's rights across government, so not just within children and families, but across the range of departments across Scottish Government. And there'll also be a reporting duty for those public bodies. Theirs will be every 3 years, Scottish Government one will be every 1 year, every annual report. So that's where the difference is. So public authorities already have a 3-year reporting duty under the Children and Young People Scotland Act. So it's just that duty will slightly change to what the expectations are in that report. So they will still have the same cycle of reporting, but the expectation will be slightly different. The expectation will still be, though, that children and young people are involved at all stages for both local public authorities and Scottish Government. Children and young people should be at the heart of how these reporting structures are taken forward. Okay, so as you may be aware, a couple of weeks ago, the UK government has referred the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child Bill to the Supreme Court, challenging specific sections of the bill. So that's section 6, 19 to 21. So what I want to stress is that it's not the whole bill that's at risk. It's just parts of the bill that are in relation to the UK government and the decisions that they make for Scotland. So that's the only parts that are actually in contention when it comes to this reference to the Supreme Court. So that they're not challenging our power to basically implement children's rights. They have no issue with that. It's just specific sections of it. So the bill will still go forward. It may just have to be amended depending on the outcome. And we don't know when that's going to be, because we've only ever been taken to the Supreme Court once before on the continuity bill. And so we're having to base it off those timescales. So it's still a bit of an unknown entity. The aim was for commencement to take place 6 months after royal assent, which would have been October this year. Now, if the timeframes allow with the Supreme Court case, if we were to get commencement in royal assent before October, there are powers in the bill that means we could still commence in October. So that is why we're saying that we are still going forward with the implementation plan. So it's not that this could get delayed for another year. If we were to if the court case was to resolve for October, we could still see commencement in October. But we have to be flexible because we don't know how long they're going to take. So a new place for us to be. And until that's resolved, we can't get royal assent for it. Now, we've got a 3-year implementation plan that's going to be in place to take forward this work. So the majority of that is still going forward. There's just the sections that are relating to the court case are the sections that we have to figure out what we can progress and what we can't progress while it's in a legal situation. So the majority of it will go forward. And it's an active approach, so children and young people are involved in the planning of this, and they will be involved in the development of guidance and things like that as well. So things are still going forward. Even with the pre-election period, again, that's another area of challenge for us at the moment. So there's certain things that we can't do because ministers can't sign off on anything while we're in an election period, but we're doing what we can so nothing gets delayed beyond our current plans for timescales. So the 3-year implementation plan, this is the very summary version of it. We've a very detailed driver diagram that I won't bore you with at the moment, but know that there's a lot going on. So we've split it into 3 strands. So the team is now in 3 strands. So SG leadership for public services. So that's where all of the work around what's going to be going on in Scottish Government is going to sit. So child rights and wellbeing impact assessments, children's rights scheme, reporting, making sure that policy colleagues are all up to speed about children's rights and are keeping it at the heart of their decision making. Empower children who can claim their rights. So this strand is specifically about children and young people and empowering them and their parents and the duty bearers that are with them. So it's about making sure they know what children's rights are, what they have to do to challenge them, where they can go, what their routes are. So that's the main bulk of that middle one. And then the last one is embedding children's rights in public services. So that's all of the support to local authorities, NHS boards as such, about giving them guidance about how they do their reporting, how they might involve children and young people. So it's a range of situations for them. So we've split it into 3 strands, and the team now has staff in 3 strands as well. So there will be different areas across the board. So our aims is to make sure that children's rights are respected, protected and fulfilled in Scotland. And hopefully things will go forward as we can. So our priorities at the moment, we are establishing an implementation board, which will have children and young people involved in it. We're just figuring out how we get them involved in that process. And then there will be other working groups and stakeholder support. So it may be that at some point you're asked to take part in a survey or a working group to find out how you can contribute to taking forward the implementation plan. And then participation of children and young people are at the heart of all of this. Nicola Hughes, my colleague, is the lead for embedding children's rights in public services, is currently preparing guidance to support people to fulfil those duties. There also will be the development of a skills and training framework. If you're familiar with the trauma framework for training, we're taking a similar approach to that, so that we've got a clear process of here's the range of training available and who should be matched to which training needs to be done, so that we sure everyone gets the training that they require. And then the delivery of the children's rights scheme. So like the local authority reporting, Scottish Government also have their reporting, and now that we're changing our reporting cycle to match that as well. But again, some of this may not necessarily be published when we thought it was going to be, just because we don't know what's going to happen with the court case. Let's see. Okay, so now we're working, there we go. So yes, so that's the bill. It will go through. We're doing what we can to keep it going. And if you have any questions about the bill, then please feel free to ask them at the end. Can't guarantee that I can answer them because they might be very legal questions and answers that I have to give you, as with any court case that's underway. But I will do my best endeavour to get an answer to you as quickly as possible. Okay, so I will take a breath there. And that's the bill. Okay, so that's where we're currently at. So incorporated into our bill work is child rights and wellbeing impact assessments, and this is one way how we evidence we're meeting our children's rights duties and that we're also involving children and young people in that process. So I'll go through what the process is, why we do it, and some different examples, because I now have examples from other organisations as to how you might want to implement child rights and wellbeing impact assessments in your own organisation, because I do want to stress you do not have to follow the Scottish Government model. I know it's very bureaucratic and it's very paperwork based, so please know that you don't have to follow our process. You can if you wish, but you don't have to. Okay, so in case you're not familiar with them, child rights and wellbeing impact assessments are used to identify, research, analyse and record the impact of an organisational decision. So we've changed this because it usually says policy or legislation, but we know that that only fits in a Scottish Government context. So it's very much about your decision-making processes and whether or not a decision you make will impact on children's human rights and wellbeing. So that's both the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and also the wellbeing indicators under Getting It Right for Every Child. So if you happen to do a Google search for children's rights impact assessments, you will see that other places do not have wellbeing included. This is a Scottish Government thing only, because we have the wellbeing indicators in place. So you might be able to find templates from other organisations in other countries that fit your organisation better, and it may just be that you have to include a question on wellbeing, and that's perfectly fine. It's completely flexible for a process. So yes, so why do we need them? So the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, they issue general comments along with the convention. So the convention was created in 1989. So obviously that was a long time ago, and society has changed. We have the internet now that they didn't have in 1989 and all the things that they have to consider. So as we go through, as society changes, they will release general comments as to how we can improve the convention without actually changing the convention, because the nuts and bolts of it are there and can be applied to different scenarios. So they will issue general comments as to why they think that something else could be done to improve that. And so this is general comment number 5, and I've just noticed a spelling mistake on the slide. Please ignore that. So yes, so children's rights, so children have the rights and needs. They're different from adults, which is why they have children's rights. They have extra considerations that need to be given because they don't necessarily have the ability to speak up for themselves, depending on their age, or if they happen to have any learning disabilities or communication needs. So it's important that adults give them extra consideration. Wellbeing is vital to a nation, because if you've ever studied Maslow's hierarchy of needs, unless you have your basic needs, trying to move on to well-being and talking about emotional development is difficult to do unless your basic needs are met. And that's what children's rights are founded on, is making sure that those basic needs that children have, it's a baseline, it's the foundation of your house, and then well-being is the bricks that go over it. Children are largely excluded from public decision making. We are much better at it in Scotland than some other places. We're not saying we've got it perfect, but it's definitely one that they're not taking into consideration for. We obviously have different voting rights in Scotland. For example, 16-year-olds can vote in the Scottish Parliament elections in the next couple of weeks as well. Also, it's very hit and miss. Again, not one that we've got perfect in Scotland either. Responsibility for children can be fragmented across organisations, local authorities. So yes, it's important that we integrate across all of them. And that children do tend to get forgotten about. Sometimes they are seen as a separate entity and not as a citizen in their right, and so get forgotten about in consultations. Again, that's another thing that we're trying to prove. And it depends more on public services, so schooling, health, things like that as well. So they have more services that they may come into contact with. So why is it important in Scotland? Because careers improve essentially how we are taking children's rights forward, and how we're protecting and promoting their well-being. If you think of, if children's rights are the foundation, now the convention is matched across every country in the world, and obviously comparing two countries, depending on which two countries you are comparing, what basic set of rights means for a child in Scotland may be completely different to what it may mean for a child who's living in poverty in Africa. So we have to remember this is a baseline, and that baseline will be different for each country, because you have a different set of rights to start off with. Okay, so that's where we're taking the two things to cover with the bill. Okay, so when should you use them? As soon as possible. If your organisation is making a decision, then consideration should be given as to whether or not you have to do a child rights and wellbeing impact assessment on that decision. It can be used for a range of things. It's not just about policies. It could be programmes of work that you're going to be delivering with families, or with parents. Always remember that the impact, if you're working with parents and not working directly with children, there will be an indirect impact on the children as a result of that that could benefit their rights and well-being. It could be done on budgets. We've not implemented child rights budgeting, but that's something that we're looking at in the Scottish Government. So that may be an area, so you consider how your organisation is allocating its funding. Is the decision on how it allocates funding related to children and families? Will that support their rights being taken forward? It could be done on guidance, could be done in your child protection policy, it could be done in a staff HR policy. One thing to always remember is that the convention goes up to 18. So sometimes 16 and 17-year-olds get forgotten about, because in some parts of Scots law they're seen as adults. But in terms of the convention, it covers them up to their 18. So if you have staff, if you happen to have a modern apprentice, for example, or a younger member of staff, consideration may have to be given whether or not there's extra things that you have to put in place around children's rights. So it's broader than we sometimes think it can be covered. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the process from Scottish Government point of view, and then I'll take you through other examples of what you might want to do to simplify it for yourselves. There we go. Okay, so this is our process. Again, it's very bureaucratic. If we take a decision, so if Scottish ministers decide that they wish to do something around child poverty payments, or if they want to do something around a family, the baby box, things like that, if they're taking a new decision to implement policy or legislation, we do it for both, then what they do is they will phone myself and go, how do I do a CREA? And even though the guidance is there, they'll usually ask for help first. And then we will either point in the direction of some training, or they get some e-learning to go with it. There is an e-learning module available that is going to be updated in the future, that you'll be able to use. So that you may have seen one that's a PowerPoint presentation. We do hope to update that so it's a bit more detailed and is actually an e-learning module. So it's got like a scoring bit at the end. And then once they've done that, we will give them the templates. And then the simple process is stage one, do I need to do a child rights and wellbeing impact assessment? So what is the decision that you are trying to make, and will it impact on children and young people? Yes, no, and please explain why. Stage two, now this is a bit that if you didn't like exams at school, this might put you off, but I explain to people that stage two is where you show your working. So if you've made a decision and that decision has a positive or negative impact on children and young people, this is where you show the working and why you've made that decision. So because it may be that it has a negative impact, but the negative impact may be necessary and proportionate. For example, COVID. This is where the majority we've seen negative impacts in place because we've had to take decisions to protect the health and safety of the population, including children and young people. So some decisions, for example, closing schools, have had to be made, and that's resulted in a negative impact on children's rights to education. for example. But the process of going through the CREA, you can show where that decision was made, what the impact is going to be, how you're going to mitigate that impact as much as possible, and that's where you would do that in stage 2. And then stage 3 is publication summary, basically combine stage 1, stage 2, and publish it on the Scottish Government website. So that's our kind of process and a cycle, and then there's a review and update process built in as well. So it's not a one and done. Child rights and wellbeing impact assessments are something that should be continuous for the life of a policy. So if you're reviewing your policies and you've got it built in that you review it in a year, then you should also review an impact assessment when you do it and make changes if anything's happened in the process. So this is our paperwork. Again, not exciting, but we are trying to change it. It's under review at the moment. But what's important about it is the questions you ask yourself if you're doing one. What aspects will affect children and young people up to 18? Now, there are some things that in Scotland it's slightly different because the convention goes up to 18, whereas our children are looked after. They get those rights a little bit longer in Scotland. So that may be that if it's a looked after children situation, that may be where they have extra. This would be covering them as well. What that impact will be, this is the bit that often challenges people because they forget about the indirect impacts. One about, for example, potholes in the road. People often wouldn't think that potholes would require a child rights and wellbeing impact assessment. But if the pothole is outside of a school and the road in front of the school is going to have to be closed off, then there's going to be machinery, roadworks. So will that affect the safety of children and young people? Or if you're going to close a road off, that means a village in a rural community is going to be shut off. Does that mean children can't get to school? Or does that mean that the community is shut off for a set period of time from accessing other services like health? So it's taking that into consideration and thinking outside the box a little bit as well. What that impact will be, will it be positive, will it be negative? Often impact assessments are seen as measuring the negative and the bad. But children's rights are about the positives. It's about the good story. What are we doing to make sure children get their rights in Scotland? So remember to tell the good as well as the bad. So it should be a mix of both. Which groups of children and young people will be most affected? This also might be different. It may be that children and young people with a disability will be affected differently than those who don't. So also thinking about the Equality Act and how those two might interact with each other. A child isn't just a child about their rights, they're also a child who may have a religion, they have a identified sexual orientation, disability, race. So to take that into consideration that they're not just one thing, there may be an intersectionality across the different parts. And if you're an organisation that does do equality impact assessments, this can be where you could join them up. Because again, you can combine impact assessments. You don't have to do them separately. You can integrate them into each other. Not find the perfect way to do that yet, but different organisations have tried different things. So you can join them up. And then once you've asked yourself those questions, is it a yes, is it a no? And how you want to do that as an organisation to make that decision. Do you want to build in a process where someone signs it off? So the chief exec has to sign off that decision? Or are you content, once that decision is made, to just keep moving with the process or stop if it's been a no CREA required? So again, it breaks into chunks for you. But this should be done at the start of the decision-making process. And also, the other thing to not be afraid of is that if you do follow our 1, 2, 3 process, it's expected that stage 1 is different from stage 3. Because if they've gone through the proper life cycle of development something, stage 1 is just your initial idea. What was your initial idea as to what this decision would do? So it can change over time. So remember that, so don't be afraid if they don't match once you get to the end, because you can explain that in your stage 3 to say, this is how this decision has changed, who was to influence that change in the decision, what the role children and young people played in that as well. If there was a direct involvement, or if it was evidence-based use and research that helped influence that decision. So yeah, so it may change as well. Stage 2 is basically the bulk of it. This is where you have to identify your articles. I always say to people, if you're not familiar with children's rights and the convention, I wouldn't expect you to memorise it off by heart, honestly, I really wouldn't. And what I would suggest is you get yourself a summary version of it. So UNICEF have a good summary version of the convention that you can start with, and think about your decision on one side, get yourself the summary version on the other, work through it and pick out which articles you think are relevant to your policy or your guidance or programme, whatever it is that decision's relating to. Pick them out, and then once you've identified which ones you think it is, then go to the full convention. Because if you've ever seen the full convention, it can be a whole page and a summary is only 3 lines long, and it loses the nuance of what the actual article was trying to get across. So matching them both. So that can be one way to do it, and it's less daunting for people if they've never looked at the convention before, is to start with the summary, check that the full convention's actually what it is it's getting at, and then write them in. And say why. Why have you chosen that article? And is the impact positive or negative on that article? And if it's negative, what will you do to try and mitigate the impact? In some cases, the impact will be a negative impact, and say how you will mitigate to the best of your ability as an organisation. Similar exercise down in question 5 is about similar question to question 1, is about wellbeing indicators. Again, do the same thing, get yourself a copy of the indicators with their description. And I've got extra handouts that I can always get sent across to you to show you how we've done it. And pick it out again, pick the ones that are relevant, and understand why these are impacted upon. So that 1 and 5 are very similar in how they're structured. And then obviously you've said your impacts, and then is there any different impacts for groups of children and young people? The purpose of this question is that if you have a group of young people that are specifically going to be impacted upon by a decision that your organisation has made, then those would be your primary group for going out to consultation, and that's how you would identify them. So if you have very limited scope for going out to consultation, then if you've identified who your target group is, then that would be where you could put your focus, or where you need to focus your research if you're looking for any evidence that we already have that we've researched. Because again, we don't want you to research for research's sake, and consulting. Death by consultation happens to everyone, and it's happening a lot to children at the moment. So it's definitely worth looking to see what we already have for that specific group. And then next question, so working our way down, if you've got any negative impacts, if that box is empty, that's okay too. There doesn't have to be a negative impact. Again, it could be about a positive story and explain why it's if there's no negative, that's okay. But it may be where you just think about the future as well. So if you have, you've thought about it just now and you've thought, oh, there's no negative impact at the moment, but if something was to change, then there may be a negative impact in the future. You could have that thought process through there as well. These are organisational documents, so it may be that in Scottish Government, for example, we only have to publish stage 1 and stage 3. That's going to change in the future, it will be the whole thing. But if this is an organisational document, then that can be worked through as an organisation, thought process and planning for the future as well. So it depends how you want to, if you want to publish everything. Again, the way that we look at it is in Scottish Government, someone could put a freedom of information request in and that would be accessible. So why would you hide your decision-making process for something? So it's up to you as an organisation. We've gone through wellbeing, and then how will the policy measure give better or further effect to the implementation of the UNCRC in Scotland? So at the moment it says Children and Young People Scotland Act. That will be changed to the bill once it goes through. So what are we doing to make sure children get more rights in Scotland? So you have your baseline. So for example, when it comes to right to education in Scotland, there's a set level as to what the convention says children should get. In Scotland, we give them more than that. So what are we doing to make that increase for children in Scotland? What do they get more of than just what the convention says, is what would go in that box. And then the next 3 questions are about consultation. So the first one in our form is about research evidence. What do we already know? What data do we have? Do we have journal articles? Do we have surveys? Anything like that. Then the next question is about stakeholders. So like yourselves, and the families or children and young people that you work with. That would be where our information would go in there if we consulted with you. And then the last question in it is how we've involved children and young people. Was there direct engagement with them? How did we go about it? What did they say? And did anything change as a result? Okay, so that would be one way of doing it. And then stage 3, as I said, just a summary of stage 1 and stage 2 put together. So that's going to change in the future. It's the Scottish Government version. Again, these are only examples for how you could use it if you want to use it. There's some simplified ones coming up after this that you could use. But this is the Scottish Government process, and we have to get signed off by a Deputy Director whenever that's published. And the one thing that we are working on at the moment is producing child-friendly or accessible versions. Because again, the purpose of these documents are for children and young people to see how we're making decisions for them. So it should be a document they can read and understand, and if they want to question it, they should be able to understand the decision we've made and how they can go about questioning it. So if you want to make a more accessible version of the templates, again, that's completely up to yourselves as an organisation, something that we're working on as well, so that they can do. So that's the Scottish Government one. Here's the simpler ones that can be used, and they're much shorter. So these can just be a set of questions that you can have. So if you're creating anything for new policy guidance programmes, this could just be a cover sheet that you have. And when you're doing that decision-making process, just ask yourself a series of questions you could do. And nuts and bolts, all of those questions essentially what are in our 3 documents. We've just gone a longer way about it. And it could be questions that children and young people can also get involved with. So what's the decision about? What will it do for me or children and young people? Why do we need to make this decision? And which children and young people have been affected? Here's what they've said. Are my rights affected? Will it be better? Who do I speak to? Will anything bad happen? And who can I speak to? So it's much more simplified and straightforward as an approach that you could use as a cover sheet if you don't want to have a whole form structure to your processes. The next one, now this one was given to us by Highland Children and Young People's Forum as an example that they've done. So they've basically created a table for their organisation. So for each of the policies within their organisation, they've ran through the stages of the questions. So they have what's the overall aim of the policy, how will it affect them, what's the impact, any specific children and young people groups will be affected, does it require a CREA, which rights are supported, will different young people be affected, and which aspects of wellbeing will be enhanced. So it's a much more straightforward, shortened version that could just be sat at the front of a policy or in front of an organisation's folder to say, here's all our policies and here's how we've gone through it. Now, CREAs are normally something that's done through the process. What they did as this exercise is they did it retrospectively. So they went through all of the policies they already had and did this exercise for each one. And then that way they knew that when they came up to refreshing a policy, they could see what they thought at the beginning and then they could update as they go, rather than having to do the whole process all over again. So that's their simplified stage 1 and stage 2. And then their stage 3, the same policy, is are changes needed to support rights or mitigate? How do we know? What views have they gathered? Findings and built-in monitoring and review. Again, monitoring and review is one of the weaknesses when it comes to impact assessments, about it not being built into the process. It's not just about updating the policy, also update the impact assessment. So that's one example. It's very simple. It's just a table, run through each of your policies, can be nice and short. They've also got a version that they made for children and young people, which was just symbols and which articles matched which part of their policy, and then the children and young people just picked out the symbols. So they didn't have to know what each of the articles meant, but they knew what the symbols meant, because some of the children and young people that they work with have communication challenges, so they find that to be a much simpler way to involve them in decision making. So symbols might be another way that you can do it as well. So that was their example. And then, so there's an organisation called the European Network of Ombudspersons for Children. And so this is what the Children and Young People's Commissioner for Scotland is a member of. Bruce Adamson is currently the chair of this network at the moment. And so this was the version that they'd created for children and young people to understand, and how it's simplified. So again, it's just a series of questions, similar structure to Scottish Government, screening, scoping, gathering evidence. Again, it's just a series of questions that they can ask children and young people as well to go through the process. So rather than just it being an organisational exercise, asking yourselves the questions, it can be that you've got staff, volunteers, children and young people all in the same room working your way through the questions together. So that may be another option, and making it more interactive. So again, will the decision affect children's rights? Which articles? What evidence do we need to gather? What has it told us? And is there anything we've not been able to find? And using that as the basis of how they structure the consultation. And going out. And then assessing the impact. What impact does it have? Other groups. So again, similar questions to what we've asked ourselves, and similar questions as to what Highland Children and Young People's Forum have asked ourselves. So the questions aren't dissimilar across the models. It's just how you wish to structure it for your organisation to make it fit, and not an onerous task. And so it's not seen as being something that is a tick box exercise, actually adds value to how you make decisions as an organisation, and which you think would be the best process for you to use. So top tips for child rights and wellbeing impact assessments. Starting early, I cannot stress this importantly enough. Please start early as possible in the decision-making process to start it, because often what happens is you realise you've started the process, you're filling in paperwork, and you've asked yourselves the questions, and then you've gone, oh, we need to ask those children and young people, but we want to publish something by such and such a date. And then that means that you've not planned it in enough. So timing and consistency, getting things started early in the process with screening. Who do we need to speak to or hear from? What evidence do we have? Kind of put that to the top of your process, making sure that children and young people's views are at the start of it. Using convention rights, making sure that you're identifying the right children and young people, and then ensuring that if you can engage with children and young people, I know not all organisations engage directly with children and young people. So as a parent's views that you have to gather that would then give you that evidence to show what the knock-on effect would be. Establishing a review mechanism. Who's going to do the review? Often it's just another policy person that does the review. Again, make sure that if it's staff, volunteers, children and young people may want to do the review as a team. Or service users do the review as a team. Then what are you going to review, and when are you going to do it? So set yourself into the structure, making sure you've put a date on it, and structure it around that way, and ensuring your attention is paid to indirect impacts. Try and just think outside the box sometimes, or ask someone who's not as close to it as well, because sometimes the person who's writing an impact assessment is too close into it, and asking someone else outside the team it sometimes helps identify the indirect impacts that you just haven't thought of. Again, it shouldn't be one person's job. It should be a team exercise, because it's your organisation decision-making process. So ensuring that multiple people are involved in its development. Again, involving children and young people is the most important part of this, whether that be through gathering the research that we already have, or direct engagement with them. Article 12 is one of the general principles of the Convention, which is every child has a right to be heard and matters affect them. Now, what I would say with this one is that children and young people's views should be considered and definitely taken account of, but the article is not saying that you have to agree with them. It may be that there's a reason why something has to take place and why that will be in opposition to a child's views. As long as you can explain what that is, why that decision's had to be taken, and what the mitigating factors are, then that's okay under the Convention. You wouldn't be going against the Convention in any way. So it's just important that they are taken into consideration and you can explain why you've made that decision. So I've put a hyperlink in here that's to the Scottish Government web pages. So we worked with a range of stakeholders last year to create a participation website built into the Scottish Government website that takes you through different examples of how organisations have engaged with children and young people. We also have a list of research publications. that have got gathered children and young people's views. So that might be helpful when you're doing something, and if you don't have direct engagement but you want to try and find out their views on something, it may be that we've got that in a list already there that you can access. We're going to be adding in a section specifically on COVID related consultations that have been taking place with children and young people as well. So we've got a number that Scottish Government have done, a partnership with Children's Parliament, looking at the younger age range about how they've experienced the pandemic and our response. 15 Stories was another part that was looking more at families with younger children, and then Lockdown Loading, which was focusing more on 14 plus up to 25 and the experience of the pandemic. And that's currently out on its third cycle of consultation. So it was a 3-part consultation to see how we were going through the initial pandemic and then the recovery. So that information will all go on our research website. We've also got consultations that have been done from other parts of the UK and international as well. So there's a wealth of information in there even just to have a look at, to get some ideas maybe as well. And if you want to contribute an example to it, once you've had a look at it, again, more than happy to add in examples, because we've got practice examples from other organisations built into the website. So yeah, so it doesn't have to be direct consultation, can be research we've already got, or contacting a partner organisation to see if they've got any information that's not necessarily published peer-reviewed research, and maybe that it's something that they have as an organisation that may help you. So again, good bit of partnership working could come in at this point as well. So yes, so I think that's us just about time. That might be the first time I've ever done this presentation on time.
Thank you very much, Ceri. That's absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate it. There's such a lot of information in there.
Yes.
Ceri, there's a few people have put questions in, but I think we're going to wait and pick the questions up after the break.
Yep.
So that you get a break as much as anything else. We are pretty much bang on time for a 10-minute break, and we will see you at 11 o'clock. Have a good break from your screen. We'll see you in 10 minutes. If you want to type any questions in the chat in the meantime, then feel free, we'll pick them up. Welcome back, everybody. It's really lovely to see you all still here. We've got a few questions in the chat that we're going to work through. And oops, I just need to stop sharing that, don't I? We've got a few questions in chat we're going to work through. And if you have other questions that you've not put into chat yet, then if you type them in, we'll come to them in order, if that's okay. So Ceri, I think that you've said yes to sharing your slides with everyone. Am I correct about that?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So in terms of questions, Lucy from Who Cares Scotland, I wonder if you want to unmute. You've got 2 questions in there, so if you can ask your first one, and then we'll pick up the second one as well. Here's Lucy.
Hi everyone, sorry I'm not on camera, my Wi-Fi is a bit slow today. Yeah, just the first one was around the 18 cutoff, I guess, just because we work with quite a wide range of care experienced people of different ages, and obviously there's the up to 26 rule in terms of corporate parenting. So it'd be good to know if we can sort of adapt the career, I guess, to work for our organisation, just to be inclusive of under 26. We are looking to do other human rights assessments as well, like as part of a wider organisational move. But yeah, just your advice on that would be great. And I think the second question was just if you have sort of go-to research and resources that you use to sort of gather evidence, especially on sort of minority groups or those who have particular equalities impacts, that would be really useful to know, just so that we can then make sure we're going to the right places to do this kind of research. Thanks very much.
Yep. So to answer your first one, yes, you can extend it up to 26 if you want as an organisation. Again, the tools are flexible. We've no set. We've obviously got our Scottish Government one, but we would never expect you to try and use our process. We know that some organisations have tried to use it and it's been very lengthy and doesn't quite fit. So yeah, please adapt to your organisation and how it sees fit. And yes, integration with other human rights kind of impact assessments is extremely useful as well, because obviously if you can reduce the number of processes that you're doing, and there's obviously a crossover with other human rights instruments, so children and young people might have the UNCRC, but then if they've got a disability, then it might also fall under the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. So yes, if you want to cross over with other convention rights as well, we're more than happy for you to do that as well. It's something that we're looking at, because obviously we've got the Human Rights Task Force. So once the incorporation of the UNCRC bill goes through, they are looking to incorporate other human rights instruments into Scots law, which will have human rights impact assessments attached to it. So yeah, so if you want to start that work now, then more than happy to do that. In terms of research, so we have on the participation web pages that Katrina has put in the chat to share from the Scottish Government website. So we have a list of different research, and we've tried to break it down into different sections, and we're more than happy to add things in. So if we're missing a group of children and young people that's got a specific characteristic, and there's research there, then we're happy to add it to the website, because we want it to be a place for people to use as a one-stop shop. So it's not just a Scottish Government resource, it's for everyone, to make it useful. I know that Young Scot have also got a bank of research, Children in Scotland as well. So there are other organisations who have research that you might be able to pick up that we've not necessarily got on our website, but it may be on other ones that we use. So yes, there is different ones that we have, and we're building it as we go. So we have a basic website up just now with various ones like early years, children and young people, and different characteristics as well. So yeah, so there's a starting point for you there as well. Yep, hopefully that answers your question. Yes.
Ceri, thank you very much for that. I'm wondering if people have examples that they want to share. You're obviously not going to be there. Where's the best person for them to send? Where's the best place for them to send them?
So what I'll do is I will put our team mailbox in for you as well. So there's a team mailbox that everyone in the Children's Rights and Participation team can access, and that's probably the best place to share any examples with, and then other people can pick them up much quicker when I'm not here.
Lovely. Okay, thank you very much, Ceri. We've got a question from Lucy from John Muir Trust. Lucy, do you want to unmute yourself and ask Ceri?
Thanks. Yeah, I just had a query for organisations like ourselves at the John Muir Trust. We're a conservation charity. We don't work directly with children, young people or families. We instead work with youth and family engagement organisations, outdoor centres, schools, quite a variety. I was wondering, could you give any examples of maybe when an assessment would be undertaken in that context, where it's not sort of direct relationship, and I guess connected to that, any tips on how we could maybe consult children and young people when we don't have that direct connection to them ourselves?
Mm-hmm. So what I would suggest is, one place to start is if you go through the articles of the convention and see where your organisation's general kind of vision and aims fit, and see which articles kind of relate to that as an organisation. And then working from there, you can also see, okay, so we may not be directly impacting this, but indirectly by supporting organisations, then this is the rights that we're contributing towards. So that we know that you won't necessarily have direct responsibility for furthering that article, but as an organisation, the support you give others will be supporting them to take that forward. And in terms of, it may be that you don't have to do the whole impact assessment. That's what's important to stress as well. If you do the screening sheet and you're not going to have major impact, because it's about being necessary and proportionate. So again, we would say that if it's only going to impact on a couple of young people, or that the impact is not large, there may be that it's not necessary to do a full impact assessment. But it could be that you put in your organisation a statement to say, we support children's rights by supporting organisations to do this. So it's not necessarily about putting a whole process in place. It could be about making a children's rights impact statement as an organisation, and not necessarily a process. So for those who aren't directly engaging, that may be the route that you go down as well. Was there another part to your question? Sorry.
The second part, I was just wondering, later in your presentation, thinking about ways that we could potentially do direct consultation if we did a screening and realised that was something that would be necessary. Just any tips, I suppose, for organisations that don't have groups of children or young people that they work with, any tips on how to consult and how to identify groups that we could ask for input?
So in the organisations that you kind of support, is there an evaluation or feedback mechanism that you can get information from them through, that you could add a question into that may help? Or it may be contacting like Scottish Youth Parliament, Children's Parliament, and finding out if they've got any information, and if there's any questions that they could ask. So like Scottish Youth Parliament have 3 sittings a year where they engage with children and young people. It may be that it's a simple question that can be asked through them for you. It may be if Scottish Government are doing like a large nationwide survey and there's information that you're looking for, if you were to get in touch and say, we're trying to get information on this that'd be really helpful, then it may be something that we could add into our surveys as well, that we're doing. So I realise we've probably got more resources than other organisations to do that. So don't feel that Scottish Government won't necessarily help in that way, because we're looking for our own things. The lockdown lowdown survey was a prime example where different organisations needed different information, and we've adapted the questions to fit and gone through broad areas. So it could be that you can contact with us and we might be able to integrate it into one of ours if there's a third sector organisation who's not able to support you.
That's really helpful, thank you.
Thanks, Ceri. I'm going to ask Heather from Relationships Scotland. She's got a question in chat as well. Hi, Heather.
Hi there. It was really back to the very beginning. I had looked online at the screening information and tried to fill in something just as an example. And then at the end it says, do you need an impact assessment, yes or no? And I wasn't sure where the boundary was for that. So I was a bit confused at that point.
Yeah, so when you're making a decision, so once you've gone through, okay, so will the decision that we've made impact children and young people's rights? So is it going to be a positive impact or a negative impact? Negative impacts, generally, yes, you would be going through the full process because you'd have to explain how you're mitigating. But again, if it's a positive impact, you could still go through the whole process. It depends on, we've tried to say size of impact. So if it's going to affect a large group of children and young people, and that you would really need to get views or evidence to support your decision that you've made, then yes, you would go through a CREA, go through the full thing. But it is about understanding as an organisation about, is the impact only going to affect one young person? But then looking at it, is the impact on that one young person a large impact? So it may be that it's one young person, but the impact on that young person is quite considerable, a decision that you've made. So again, we don't necessarily always place the numbers game on it. But it's yourselves as an organisation about what impact, the strength of that impact is, and size of the impact. So if it's likely to be a positive impact, would it be all right just to put a statement in a policy rather than do a whole assessment thing? Yeah, it's possible to do that as well. It's up to yourselves as an organisation if you feel if that decision is if it's a decision that's a significant change from what you already have as an organisation, then it may be that you want to make sure that children and young people are involved in that decision as well. But if it's a decision that's not necessarily a huge decision, it's a slight change and the impact's not going to be huge, then it could be that you just put a statement in the start of the policy to say you've considered children's rights and these are the impacts it's going to make on these articles of the convention. So yes, it can be a statement, it doesn't have to be a whole process.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather, for that. Kirsty from Child Poverty Action Group.
Thanks so much, and thanks, Ceri. That was a great presentation. We're in a slightly different position in that we don't work with children and families really directly at all, apart from one of our projects in Cost of the School Day. But so most of our work is around supporting other organisations to provide benefits advice, or through our policy section to try and influence government, sort of Scottish Government, Westminster Government, but local authorities as well, to try and make sure that they are taking positive decisions to reduce child poverty, and wondering when is it appropriate for us to be doing the impact assessment, because you know, some of the things that we have asked for, so for example we were instrumental in asking for the Scottish Government to use their payment powers, to their social security powers, to introduce the Scottish Child Payment. That has obviously had a massive impact, but we didn't know at the beginning that that would have a massive impact. So just kind of trying to understand how do we use these to their best advantage?
Yeah, so I mean, so the benefit is the Scottish Child Payment itself has its own CREA.
Yeah.
This is a knock-on effect of that decision.
Yeah.
So I think what I would say, there's one thing, so when we were doing the impact assessments for the Children's Rights Bill itself,
yeah,
there's very little evidence out there that people have done to say this is the knock-on effect of implementing children's rights on reducing poverty.
Okay.
We find it really difficult to find evidence to support that, internationally as well as locally. So it may be that the statement you can maybe look into how as an organisation you would consider by implementing these articles of the UNCRC will help contribute to reducing child poverty. It doesn't necessarily have to be the whole process. It could be a commentary about it, that impact, because it's definitely one area that we were definitely lacking evidence for.
That's really interesting. And if you think that's something that somebody in the unit might want to follow up on, obviously, well, in your absence, then we'd be really interested in having that conversation to see how we can support that. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Thanks, Kirsty. I think our next question that we've got is from Sarah at Starcatchers.
Hi, thanks so much, Ceri, for your presentation. My question actually builds on what Kirsty was saying as well, just about, well, we're an arts organisation at Starcatchers. I think you might have already answered this question actually, but providing theatre productions and community engagement projects for children from birth to 5 and their grown-ups as well. It would be great to get some examples of when we could use a CREA or, you know, the impact statement or the other kind of model in our work and our decision making.
Yep. So I mean, so you've got a prime example where you've got specific there's specific articles in the convention that can relate to your organisation. So, for example, Article 31. So generally it gets called the right to play, but it is beyond that. It's about leisure and culture, and that's what the Starcatchers would fit in that place for children and young people, and how you would be supporting them with that right. But there's also other rights that you would fit under across the convention about with parents as well. So it's definitely, again, it would be about matching up and becoming more familiar with which articles of the convention fit in your organisation. And then once you're familiar with those ones, going beyond that to see what other ones you're impacting on. It may be smaller impacts, but definitely you'd definitely be fitting under the right to play and culture and experience and culture. So that would be where you could use them. And if you're doing a programme with children and young people or with families, it's a theatre programme, then that's how you could do your impact assessment, is relating to that. It's about this theatre programme will support children and young people, whether it's about children and young people having a say in something, so you'd be supporting their Article 12 rights, and that you've taken that into consideration through the process. Again, this is where the shorter versions of the process may fit better with programmes. So it may be that you're saying, so we're doing this theatre production will support children and young people to experience their Article 31 rights, and if it's about also gathering the views of doing them making decisions through a process, so if you're doing like forum theatre, then it may also be supporting their Article 12 rights as well. So there's different ways that you can be going through that, because it's not just about children and young people have to be involved in a specific decision-making process. It's also about empowering them to get those skills to then go on to be able to take part in decision-making processes that are larger decisions. So if they're learning those skills and building their confidence, then that's you supporting them with those rights as well in the future.
Great, Ceri. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Maisie at Zero Tolerance, I think you had a couple of questions in chat.
Hi, Ceri. Thank you so much. It's really helpful. Sorry, I do have a few questions, and so if it's easier to get back to me by email, then I quite understand. The first one is on the kind of how these impact assessments relate to GOFEC assessments, and I'm aware that there is a current review of GOFEC assessments, and is this all one and the same thing, or are they kind of two separate assessments that kind of look at the same areas?
They're two separate assessments. So the assessments so there's the Child Rights and Wellbeing Impact Assessment, which looks at the impact of a decision as a whole. And then the Wellbeing Impact Assessments through CYPFEIF would be looking more at the impact for the child as an individual. So they're related, but they may be separate as well. But it's because in confusion we're aware of that, and so it's something that we're working on about how we clarify the language, because we hadn't thought that one through, because we've had CREAs and we've also had wellbeing impact assessments for under GYPFEIF, and yes, we suddenly realised recently it's causing confusion at our end, not just your end. So
thank you very much. It's really helpful. And sorry, my second question is, in what way are these assessments accountable? Because they seem just like an internal process, and I wondered, is there an accountability mechanism at all?
So in terms of Scottish Government, they're going to become a statutory duty. So Scottish Government legally will have to do them on all legislation and decisions of a strategic nature for children and young people. So there will be accountability built into that. So we will be held to account by Commissioner for Children and Young People when we don't do them. For yourselves as an organisation, that is something that you can consider building into the process with your stakeholders as to whether or not you want to have that accountability process at the end of the year to say, we did this many policies and guidance, and these are the number of CREAs that we did alongside them. And for the ones that we didn't do a CREA, here's why. So that whether or not that's like a section in your annual report that you would want to maybe write to see here's what we've done and the decisions we've made, that may be something that you can do for your stakeholders, or it may be that as an organisation, it's something that's built into your staff and structures, for example, that this chief exec or somewhere senior in the organisation double checks with staff to whether it's been done or not. But yeah,
that's really helpful. And my final question is just around the kind of the simplification of the process. So we're an organisation that promotes gender equality across the board, and so I'm kind of interested in understanding how organisations can respond to kind of complicated areas of intersectional equalities effectively, and will there be kind of training modules on this so that they can understand the kind of remit and what is required in answering those kind of questions?
So it's not been built into the training at the moment, but we can do because so the Equality Impact Assessment team are separate from us. They're a completely different part of Scottish Government, but we have been working together to try and integrate, so that we can integrate the paperwork at Scottish Government just like you can as well, if it would make it easier, because often children and young people are just seen in the age category and then aren't included in the other categories. So we're trying to kind of work our way in so that impact assessments could be covered. So it could be that it's a child rights impact assessment, but it's broken down using the protected characteristics. That may be one way for organisations to do it. Again, it's free for you to adapt to your organisation so that you can represent best for your organisation. So if you feel that would be a better way of doing it, then that's perfectly fine as well.
Great, thank you. Would it be possible to kind of follow up with you on that question at a later point, or someone within your team?
Yes, yeah, we are going to have a replacement, don't worry.
Okay, great, thank you.
I think that's just as well, Ceri, given everything that you're covering. But if we can have the kind of joint email address for the team, then people can contact them that way. That would be perfect. We've got two more questions. I think we're just going to manage to have time for them before we finish up. So Jane at National Day Nursery Association.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for your presentation. It's been really helpful. I kind of put in my question that I guess there might be procedural, so it's maybe something that hasn't been thought through yet. But obviously we're working, while we don't directly work with children, our members do, because they're nurseries. And the nurseries are going to be providing the public service through the funded childcare. So obviously they're like yourselves, I believe it'll be a statutory thing for them because it's public funding and it's a public service.
So just to clarify on that one, in terms of public authorities, there is no statutory requirement for them to do this. It's only Scottish Government.
Right, so that then kind of maybe answers my second question, which follows on from Maisie's, is really who will the report to? Will it, because I know members will ask that, who's going to check that they've done these CREAs? Will it be something that goes to Care Inspectorate, or Education Scotland, or, you know, will there be accountability for them?
So I know that it's built into, I know children's rights is built into the inspection processes for both Your Inspectorate and Education Scotland. So it is likely these types of questions may start to get asked. But again, because they're not a statutory requirement for those organisations, it may be that they don't get asked that question directly, but it may be in the guidance that will be issued. It will be listed as one of the things that they can consider as a way of evidencing how they are furthering children's rights and supporting them. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And the second part of my question was really around the the commencement of it all. You know, will there be a sort of requirement that all of this work has to be done by October, or is there going to be that, you mentioned the 3-year implementation, you know, is there going to be time for people to do this? Because there is quite a lot of work to be done for settings that work directly with children.
That's the part that we don't know, because we don't know where we're at with the Supreme Court case.
Right. Okay. Easy answer. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jane. We've got time for one very quick last question. We've got Ellie, who most of you know is a member of our team, but she's currently left us and is off working at William Grant Foundation for secondment. So Ellie, the final question is yours. If you can do it quickly, that would be marvellous.
Thank you very much. And thanks, Ceri, for a really helpful presentation. I suppose I've got a foot in two camps at the moment, both, you know, with this fund, but then with William Grant Foundation, where we're funding organisations with private money. And I suppose my question is really about the why of the CREAs, and I'd just be really interested to hear a wee bit about Scottish Government's thinking. It's almost like what's, you know, the logic model, if you like, to get a bit more of a sense of how organisations doing CREAs can contribute to the achievement of Scottish Government's kind of big picture vision in terms of UNCRC implementation. I think partly just to help give organisations a bit more of a sense of why this is a good and useful thing to do, but also to maybe get a sense as well of if this could be a useful thing for organisations with this fund, where it's not a condition of funding, but again, it could be something that could contribute to good practice.
Yeah. So with incorporation, Scotland as a government, as a country, has always been forward-looking when it comes to children's rights and their desire to make sure that children and young people who live in Scotland see Scotland as the best place to grow up. And so we've always wanted to go as far as we possibly could. Incorporation is basically the end goal on that. And I think it's about, so the process itself is about showing how Scottish Government is putting children and young people at the heart of the decision-making process, but also for external organisations, children, young people, families, to hold Scottish Government to account. And so that's why the processes are really important, because it gives you a transparent way of seeing how we've made a decision, why we've made the decision, and then for organisations to say, but that decision wasn't necessarily the right decision that you've made, and here's why. And it may be that we didn't have all the evidence at our disposal at the time, or that something's been overlooked, or we haven't explained ourselves properly. Again, it's about explaining why we've made a decision, and that's not always the strongest point. It comes across an impact assessment. So please, if you see an impact assessment and you've not necessarily agreed with the outcome, please come back to us on it and challenge that decision. That is the purpose of them. It's a tool for the public to be able to challenge us on a decision, because obviously sometimes the legislation is not accessible with the way that it's written, but the CREAs themselves should be that means of a gateway of getting into hold government to account. And it's important for organisations for them themselves to see how they're supporting children's rights in Scotland. It's going to be such a culture change in Scotland by incorporating. It's not something that another country in the UK has done to this extent. Wales has done it to the degree within their powers. So it's about us all being able to see what our contribution is to supporting children in Scotland, to get access to their rights, and then also empowering them to be able to challenge where they're not getting the rights, so they're not always reliant on adults, and they themselves can actually say, no, wait a minute, that's not right, and they've got the confidence and the ability, and they know where to go to challenge, and that's going to be all of our responsibility to support them to do that. It's not just going to be about a Scottish Government thing, because we don't see all the children and young people directly. It's organisations, it's parents, it's community members, it's everyone across Scotland to support children and young people through the challenge where they see that they're not getting them.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Ceri. I think your fears that you might not be able to answer questions have definitely not played out in practice. You've been absolutely marvellous. I'm going to hand over to Malcolm to just do the final little bit. Thanks.
Thank you, Katrina. And yeah, like I said, thank you ever so much, Ceri, and you can give your voice a wee rest just now, you know. So thanks everyone for all your engagement and questions this morning, you know. So hopefully I know a lot of information, but hopefully with that information feeling a bit reassured, expectations around the career work. We will share recording and resources and the contact information afterwards. I shared a wee comment in the chat, you know, inviting you to indicate what action you hope to take, you know, following today's webinar. So thanks for popping some in. So if you've not had chance, please do. And, you know, if you do have any other comments or things you'd like to share in the chat, then please feel free to do so. But all I really want to say on behalf of everyone, you know, a massive thank you to Ceri for this morning and all that you shared. You know, I think there's a real wealth of info and tips, and then also that offer of help from your team in Scottish Government, you know, will be most welcome. And, you know, just really wish you all the very best when you finish up for your mat leave, you know. So thanks everybody for this morning, and, you know, look forward to catching up with you again soon.